Monster Hunter Wilds seems to have released the last of its base game content, and I think it's a good time now to look towards the future. Not towards the next Monster Hunter game, but towards the expansion to Wilds. For those new to the franchise or started with Wilds, Monster Hunter has a bit of a routine with their content. After the release of every main game and some free title updates, they'll release an expansion DLC that costs just as much as the original, from new monsters to locales, along with even more free title updates. These expansions also tend to bring back a lot of returning monsters from older games, exciting old fans who grew up fighting these guys, as well as new fans who've never gotten the chance to hunt them. I personally started with World and have not played any of the old gen games, so I figured I'd make a video going into what monsters I want to see return in Wilds expansion, from the perspective of a new gen Monster Hunter fan. I will be going over 20 monsters I want to see return in the expansion, 5 monsters for each of the 4 main locales. 4 of these will be listed in order of which I think work best for the locale, while the 5th spot will be what returning Elder Dragon I think should be in each map. This isn't going to be a video where I say monsters I want back just because they look cool or because of their popularity. I made an active effort to choose creatures that actually fit each biome, so there will be some popular monsters like Gamif or Zamtrios that won't be on the list. Not because I dislike them, but simply because I don't think they fit well into any of the locales we currently have. These are monsters I think should be in the main expansion, not the title updates that'll release later on, so don't expect any paradigm-shifting dragons like White Fatalis or Dalamadur. Lastly, I will only be discussing monsters that have appeared in mainline games, so those exclusive to games like Online or Frontier won't be included. With all that out of the way, let's get into 20 monsters I want in the expansion of Monster Hunter Wilds. So starting with the Windward Plains, we begin with a monster that comes from the very first generation, and has unfortunately been shafted by his dual-horned cousin ever since. That's right, we're talking Monoblos. Yeah, I know, I made a big deal about not going for just highly requested monsters, only to pick one of the most highly requested as my first choice. Those who've never seen this guy or started with new gen may be confused as to why I'd pick Monoblos over Diablos. It's just a copy-paste with a Ceratopian head slapped on top. Well, looking at footage of these two in the same game like 4U, their AI and what attacks they prioritize are entirely different. They may have the same skeleton and baseline moveset, but the flow and rhythm of their attacks are completely distinct from each other, so I wouldn't call Monoblos a copy-paste in the slightest. In terms of ecology, Monoblos feasts on desert plants and grass rather than the cacti that Diablos tend to favor. Because of the lack of cacti in the Windward Plains, Monoblos would make much more sense to sustain in this environment. On top of that, Monoblos is much more rare and dangerous than Diablos. In fact, the lore established that successfully hunting a Monoblos alone is proof of a hero, and considered an elite milestone to any hunter. Given this gravitas behind Monoblos, having it appear as a master rank monster would help do the lore justice, and easily explain why the guild finding him is such a big deal. There's a lot of cool directions you could take with this guy, but if you really want a good breakdown on this from somebody who's actually hunted him before, I recommend you check out this Make Monoblos New video by CR Volcanic. I'll leave a link in the description. I believe that the lack of Diablos would help Monoblos feel fresh for Wilds, and given how Balahara is the only monster that really spends time in the dunes and underground regions, it'd be nice to have a much stronger monster to look out for. If Monoblos were to ever return in a new Monster Hunter game, Wilds would be the perfect opportunity for him to outshine his dual-horned cousin. Now we have a monster that has already returned in Sunbreak, but given the insane creature variety found in Wilds, I think it's fair to add a Carapacian to the mix. Daimo Hermitar is my next choice for this locale, and while I'd love to see an entirely new Carapacian be added, I would be pretty content seeing this guy back. I think Hermitar would fit great into the Windward Plains. The map has an oasis and smaller rivers for him to hydrate in, letting him utilize the water element and explaining how he's able to sustain himself. Also, despite how massive the desert is, we don't really have a lot of big monsters to fill up that space in the same vein as Gravios, so Daimo's large size would really help the plains not feel so desolate. I would love to see him camouflage into the environment, watching new fans approach this massive dinosaur-like skull in the dunes, just to get ambushed by this crustaceous cheapskate would be such a delight. You could even have it where he hides in his shell during the sand tide, then comes back out during the plenty, encouraging you to actually change the weather in your tent. If both he and Monoblos returned, not only would it add to the world building, but imagine how cool it would be to see a turf war between this crabby imposter and the real Monoblos, a sight I can only dream of. Our next monster is one that is technically in the game already. Well, his white-furred cousins are at least. We have Copper Blanganga, a subspecies of Blanganga from the 2nd generation. Now it may seem like an odd choice to bring back a subspecies rather than just invent a new one, but Capcom has proved that they are willing to do this with Fulgur and Ebony. Copper Blanganga resides in deserty regions, has lost its pack of Blangas, and utilizes rocks instead of its ice breath. What makes Copper Blanganga so special is the fact that he was the very first subspecies to completely change his ecology and fight to fit the ecosystem. Before him, we had such riveting subspecies as Blue Yank Cuckoo, who, and then there was Purple Gypseros, who, Copper Blanganga feels like a subspecies ripped straight out of 5th gen, and could easily stand toe-to-toe with newer variations like Coral Puke or Fulgur Anjanath. Plus, I think having an all-physical monkey would help him stand out compared to the 3 currently in Wilds, who all utilize their elemental powers or ailments as their main source of attack. You could argue that Doshiguma fills the role that Copper Blanganga would have, but I think that Copper being entirely solitary, utilizing rocks, and his much nimbler mobility would make him distinct from the Bear Lion bunch. It may be odd to include a subspecies to this list, but I believe that Copper Blanganga would be a more than welcome addition to the Windward Plains. With our 4th desert dweller, we have a Leviathan that may have had his primary role filled by another similar sand swimmer, but I still would like to see this goofy goober return. Nibblesnarf is kind of a weird monster. I've seen this guy be considered a fan favorite by many, while others find it to be one of the most boring monsters out there. Personally, I have a soft spot for this guppy despite not having fought it. He's a fish-like creature that swims through sand and devours prey with his massive maw, even having some unique mechanics like hitting his uvula to get a special knockdown, and having him eat bombs set on the ground. I do think out of the 5 monsters I've picked here, he has the least chance of returning due to having his niche filled by Balahara, and being a relatively low tier monster. Regardless, Nibblesnarf would be awesome to see in the dunes or underground, and given how huge that part of the map is, there's plenty of room for him. Like Daimo Hermitar, you could definitely add an ambush gimmick to Nibblesnarf, having him hide under the sand and try eating you if caught. It would make for an awesome grab attack. On top of this, mechanics like the bomb throwing and wound systems would work really well with the bomb eating and uvula mechanics respectively. Call it copium, but I would love to see Nibblesnarf make a return in these dusty dunes, and hopefully be seen as more than just the boring desert fish. With that, it's time to get into our first Elder Dragon, the one I think fits the Windward Plains best, and it's pretty obvious which one I'm gonna include. It's Gen Moran. I guess Darin Moran too because of how similar they are in mechanics, but either one would be a win in my book. The Morans are these massive whale-like elder dragons that travel across the sand seas, these desolate spaces of nothing but sand as far as the eye can see. The 2 are fought in special siege hunts where you take them down atop massive ships, firing ballista from a distance and hopping on their back where you can collect minerals. Imagine Moby Dick but with a sand whale and you get to stab it with a greatsword. I think this concept is awesome for Monster Hunter, and would make for a far more interesting siege than say Zora Magdaros from World. Now to be fair, Capcom's recreation of this hunt could easily turn into another Zora encounter, where the quote-unquote fight is firing cannons and ballista while the monster barely fights back, quickly turning into a tedious 30-minute time waster. However, I do think this hunt could be made into a more engaging siege with actual interesting mechanics, and I don't think I need to explain why the Morans could work in this map. The sand ships, the expanse of never-ending desert, it's basically perfect for the 2 Elder Dragons to appear in. If I had to pick one of the 2, I would say Darin Moran, but that's solely because I like his design more with the whole red drill horn aesthetic. Either way, I think Monster Hunter's Moby Dick is an Elder Dragon that could easily fit into Wilds. It's just changing the fight into an enjoyable siege that's the tricky part. Moving on to the Scarlet Forest, this was the only locale of the 5 that was difficult because of there being too many options to pick from, rather than too little. From spanning vibrant rainforests to spacious cliffsides and sizable estuaries, there are plenty of monsters that fit into the niche of this densely packed region. But kicking off our 5 is a member of a classification that desperately needs more large monsters, especially given how impressive its first and only main species is. Nargarala doesn't nearly get enough love for how complex he is, and it is an absolute crime that he isn't one of the big dogs demanded for wilds alongside Gameth or Arachnactor. These are massive green snake wyverns with yellow plates that span their entire back and tail. These scales can detach from their tail as projectiles and become stuck to the ground, where Nargarala will vibrate his rattle to explode all the scales at once. These scale explosions are amplified by the sound and stun you if hit. Then he'll recoil around you to deliver the killing blow. If that wasn't enough, his fangs are also coated in paralysis that'll immobilize you if bit, just in case you thought you could win. We really need more monsters that use sound-based attacks rather than an element, as well as paralysis monsters that are actually, good. But Nargarala serves as a solution to all of these, and has enough complexity to make him worthwhile as a G-rank boss. Aside from his title subspecies and the Little Remobra, Nargarala is the only member of the Snake Wyverns, which is such a shame. Implementing his rig into HD would hopefully allow Capcom to create another Snake Wyvern and give Nargarala some company. Even just one new Snake Wyvern would be more than enough, as the cephalopods already have 2 new species with their first game. His green and yellow colors would fit perfectly, and given some of the art books depicting that the species has different colors depending on the region and climate, you could change the colors depending on the region as well as the inclemencies. I've heard he doesn't have the best fight in 4th gen, but I could see Capcom giving the new gen touch-up to his moveset and mechanics. I just think Nargarala is the best option for the Scarlet Forest, because he deserves so much more love than he currently has. Our next monster is essentially on par with Nargarala in terms of how much I want them to return, and is a bit of a cheat since it's 2 monsters rather than 1. Celtis and Celtis Queen. This is the one time I'm making an exception to 5 monsters, since it feels like a necessity to have these 2 together, because what is a queen without her mindless simp that she chucks at you with full velocity? Celtis and Celtis Queen are large insect-like monsters under the class of Neopterans, and share a much more abusive relationship than say Rathalos and Rathian. Celtis Queen are the dominant ones, releasing pheromones that'll attract nearby Celtis, who then become mindless zealots that join the Queen in battle. Together, they make for a challenging and interesting fight, but they even stand on their own individually, with Celtis fighting like a large tank with both water element and stench status, while Celtis has an aerial rushdown fighting style and inflicts defense down. Even putting aside the insane complexity of these bosses, working both on their own and together, the bug duo would work great given the new pack gimmick in Wilds. You could have Celtis become a pack monster, attacking you in large groups and led by a massive Celtis Queen alpha. I also think the Scarlet Forest is a great pick for them, not only because of their niche, but you could easily spread them throughout the map, having the Celtis hang high on the cliff tops, while Celtis Queen traverse the lower levels of the jungle. I think we're in desperate need of more insect monsters or Neopterans. We've had plenty of arthropods in the franchise, ranging from crustaceans to arachnids, and there's so many insects that you could make into interesting bosses. These 2 are just undeniably a must for Wilds expansion. This right here was the hardest decision of the entire video: Curapeko, Malfestio, and Hypnocrates. All 3Ds would fit well into the forest, but I sadly doubt that Capcom would add 3 mid to low tier bird wyverns for a single locale, as much as I'd love to see that. Ultimately, I decided that the best fitting bird for the Scarlet Forest would be Hypnocrates. For why I didn't pick the other 2, Curapeko's mechanic of calling other monsters is amazing, but with the lack of true interconnectivity or open world, along with Wilds not having any real invaders like Rajang or Deviljho, I think Curapeko would be better suited for a later game to have these mechanics fully realized. As for Malfestio, I think the owl would fit better in a Detritus forest rather than the humid rainforest, but I'd still love to see him back regardless, maybe in a taiga map or some new map that Wilds expansion adds. Hypnocrates did start out in Frontier, but has appeared in a mainline game back in 2nd gen, so he counts for the list. Now onto the monster, and I just love his design and concept. I'm always wishing for more sleep monsters and bird wyverns that actually look like birds, so Hypnocrates would be a double dipper in that case. He fires sleep gas as a breath attack, and I could totally see that being implemented in a way similar to Nightshade Palumu, forcing you to think about your positioning and having him punish you for falling asleep. You could even add to his mischievous personality by having him drop into fights, put a monster to sleep, then peace out. I also see this guy being a pack monster, not in large groups of 4 or 6 like Yankukku, but more so duo fights like with a Jarkon. Something unique Hypnocrates would bring is frontier representation. His return in the new gen, along with Espinas, would hopefully encourage Capcom to bring back frontier monsters in the same vein as mainline. On top of that, Hypnocrates has past variations that would help him match up to endgame content, such as Silver or Breeding Season Hypnocrates, and maybe give them a proper upgrade akin to some of the 5th gen variations. At first glance, Hypnocrates may not seem as special as Malfestio or Kurapeko, but there's a lot of potential with this NyQuil bird that I think could fully be realized here. Now this next one is gonna get me killed, because out of all the possibilities for a Scarlet Forest monster, I chose Plesioth. Yeah, I sound like a madman unironically wanting the hip check fish back, one of the most prominently hated of the entire Monster Hunter pantheon. But hear me out. Plesioth is a Piscine wyvern from the very first generation, clearly inspired by lionfish, and can be fought on land and underwater. He's also fucking massive, towering over other large beasts like Gravios, as well as utilizing sleep and the water element, being able to fire water as a pressurized beam and inflict sleep as a neurotoxin. What makes Plesioth such a notorious monster is the horrendous hitboxes, with the worst being the infamous hip check. I'm sorry, that's the wrong term. The hyperspace tackle of cosmic proportions. But despite this, I think Plesioth has a lot of unironic potential to be a great boss. His design is honestly really good for a Piscine wyvern, certainly better than Jura Tater Tot or Lava Sloth, and his size and aesthetic could very easily align with the coastal areas of the forest. They could fix up the hitboxes too, though the idea of Capcom bringing back the fish and not changing any of the garbage hitboxes is so funny to me. I also think they could change his fight to make him distinct from, say, Beatotus. Given his larger size, they could make him a lot slower and tanky, adding more physical attacks in a similar fighting style to Anjanath. And hey, if they can take Gypsyros, one of the most disliked of the old gen monsters, and turn him into a decent boss in 6th gen, I have faith that Capcom could do the same with Plesioth. Lastly, for our forest-reigned Elder Dragon, we have one hell of a unique creature, and gives Kirin a run for its money as the Elder Dragon that least resembles a dragon. Yamasukami is a huge mass of moss and tentacles, a literal floating island that traverses the sky like a hot air balloon, and has one of the creepiest mouths I've ever seen on a creature. Boom. It feeds by sucking up all of the foliage and fauna within a lake or forest in a single big gulp, sometimes unintentionally devouring people and entire villages. This is a big siege battle on a location called the Tower, mainly relying on targeting its tentacles and knocking it to the ground. They also have a symbiotic relationship with great thunderbugs that help out in the fight, akin to Zinogre's relationship with the Fulgur bugs, literally exploding at point range to annihilate enemies. The foliage on his body could easily match with the rainforest environment, and seeing him float around the map high in the sky would give him so much presence as a creature. They would definitely have to make a unique arena for him given his size, maybe some ruins akin to the tower environment in 2nd gen, or a cliffside arena that has the space to accommodate his size. It unfortunately suffers from what looks to be a very boring fight, with an insane amount of downtime and lacking any interesting attacks aside from the Kirby inhale. This would normally dissuade me from wanting him back, but Frontier introduced Yama-Kurai, a smaller origin species of Tsukami that is much more aggressive and has a much more engaging battle. The fight does look clunky in certain areas, but it feels like a proper execution of this kind of monster and concept. If Yamasukami were to be brought back, I would combine the spectacle of the original with the fighting style and mechanics found in Kurai. Overall, this is definitely an Elder Dragon that would need some major retooling and renovations, but I could easily see Yamasukami becoming one of the best and most memorable returning monsters to new fans. The Oilwell Basin is a very unique locale compared to past volcanic biomes, so picking monsters here is a bit more tricky than the humid rainforest or arid desert we just discussed. We begin with a monster that was criminally not in Rise despite its babies gaslighting us into believing so. Ignactor is a boss with a lot of interesting mechanics, being able to burrow through lava and rock to ambush prey, as well as having a lava laser akin to Gravios. He's a massive pike-like leviathan that can be found in volcanic regions, and has armor on his body from lava that hardens into molten rock. This armor mechanic honestly looks like a better version of Levisiov's, with the constant burrowing into the lava creating a flow for when the rock armor hardens and breaks. This guy is a must-have for the basin. It would be great seeing him burrowing underneath the lava, and possibly tunneling in and out of the tar-filled pipes. You could even have him be covered in tar in a similar vein to his lava armor. His laser could be used to set off tar explosions around him, leaving burning pools on the ground and possibly igniting the gunk covering him. It's been established too that Ignactor and Gravios have had a bit of a rivalry, so seeing them have a turf war or fight in his intro cutscene would be incredible. Plus, the issue Capcom had with the Leviathan skeletons clipping into the environment seems to have finally been resolved with Laggy's return. So if Shockraw can make it back, then Ignactor can too. Next up on our list is yet another monster that had his baby form appear in Rise, only for him to be completely cucked from that game for no reason. Tetsukabra is this big tusked frog-like amphibian who slides around a variety of different regions, and can crush you with his colossal jaws. His main feature is those giant tusks, which gave him forklift certification I guess, because he can lift up entire boulders from the ground, both to block your strikes and chuck at you. He has other mechanics as well, like a stubby tail that swells up when enraged, as well as a green spit attack that will sap your stamina. He also fights like a sumo wrestler similar to how Tetranodon fought in Rise. He's similar to Bombro too, where the environment he's in determines what rocks he throws at you, and can even inflict different elements at you such as Ice Blight. Tetsukabra has a very broad niche, and could reasonably fit into environments like Iceshard Cliffs and Scarlet Forest, but I chose the Oilwell Basin for a few reasons. 1. Tetsukabra secretes a substance known as paddock oil, which is super useful for blacksmiths and the main reason why they're hunted by the guild. So given the titular basin, and the fact that Azuz is known for its engineers and blacksmiths, it seems perfect for Tetsukabra to be hunted there. And 2, the Oilwell Basin needs more monsters that hang out in the upper regions with the thermal vents and water pools. This is where you could have him pick up different rocks with different elements, like rocks with water blight in the pools, molten rocks akin to the ones you throw in the lava areas, or rocks covered in oil when in the tar. I also think this guy would be great to turn into a pack. These frogs are pretty early game in their debut appearance, so I think making them a pack monster akin to Doshiguma, maybe even having a bigger alpha version, would be a wonderful way to build on him as a monster. My next choice did get a chance to appear in New Gen with Iceborne, but given the return of Misasune, it would be great to see another member of the Fated Four back. Adding Glavenus to my selection could be seen as bias because he's one of my favorite monsters, which is true, but you know what, I still think Glavenus would be a more than welcome addition. And even comparing his recency to Misasune, that guy had 3 different versions in the latest game and hasn't even had a break, so if Mizu gets that treatment, Glavenus surely can as well. This is a big blazing brute that resides in deserty, forested, or volcanic regions, and requires a lot of space to accommodate for his massive build. The sheer scale of these new locales, the basin included, could definitely accommodate Glavenus' size and sweeping attacks. You could implement some environmental interactions with him sharpening his tail on the walls or corridors, and his color scheme would match beautifully with these surroundings. I've seen people say Brachydios should return instead, and he rocks, but he really did get the best run any monster could get in Iceborne, both in base and raging. Glavenus was there too, but I feel he could be given an upgrade to his fight, especially if the things I've heard about him being better in the previous games are true. Plus, it would be the perfect opportunity to see Hellblade Glavenus return, a deviant that turns everything from a 7 to a 20. Hellblade is one of the monsters I'm looking forward to hunting the most, so seeing him come back and get an upgrade akin to Iceborne's Raging Brachy would be mind-blowing. Overall, I would be thrilled to have Glavenus back in Wilds. How could I not love seeing him in a future game? My next choice is a colossal one to be sure, and one that definitely pushes the limit on how big a monster can get, especially considering that this thing is not an elder dragon. If you had told me he was, I would totally believe it, because a Cantor truly fits the bill. A Cantor is a gigantic pseudo-wyvern, with jagged spikes throughout its entire body, a hooked tail, and forklift-like tusks that would make even the biggest Tetsukabra blush. A Cantor would undeniably need his own area dedicated to him. I think a pseudo-siege style hunt would fit super well given his size and gravitas. He would also fit well into the ecosystem, because believe it or not, a Cantor mainly feed on Gravios. Yeah, he's that big. So you could easily fit his role into the Oilwell Basin, maybe even create a similar relationship between it and New Udra. Looking back on old footage though, I definitely would like to see some changes to his battle, as it mostly looks to be fighting just a giant Tigrex, with annoying charges and roars that send you flying. I'd hope to see some new attacks or mechanics that do his aesthetic justice, and make him distinct from something like Tigrex. The reason I have a Cantor as the last of the 4 options is not because of my doubt in him returning, but rather my doubt in his brother Eucanlos returning. Eucanlos is the Kyogre to a Cantor's Groudon, being a white pseudo-wyvern that roams snowy regions, and is capable of burrowing through ice. I just don't see this guy being added to the Iceshard Cliffs in any regard, especially with the lack of space or ice for him to traverse. And I can't imagine that one of these guys will be added to Wilds without the other. A Cantor would be a lovely addition to this game, but I do have doubts because of the circumstances around him. I would use that discussion about Eucanlos to transition smoothly into the Iceshard Cliffs, but we still got an Elder Dragon to discuss. It's an obvious one, but let's go with Gogmazios.
That's it, I'm out of ideas. We're closed.
Well, there goes that script. That's what you get when you procrastinate getting your videos out. This is what you get. I don't know then. Let's just say Teostra? Teostra. Good. Connor will be happy then. Last and certainly least, we have the Iceshard Cliffs. This was indisputably the hardest map for me to pick returning monsters. Not just because of how niche of a biome the cliffs are, but also because so many cold climate monsters would just not work in this region. Gameth or Eucanlos? Way too big and impossible to move around. Samtrios? No watery or icy regions to swim in, and once again, way too big to function. Beatotus or Jade Baroth? No snowy regions to cover themselves in. The list just goes on. But let's get into the one big old gen monster that I think everyone agrees was practically made for this ecosystem. Giganox. The forgotten 4th member of the pseudo-wyvern gang, Giganox is a nasty little bugger. He's a bizarre cave-dwelling flying wyvern found in tundra regions, and despite having similarities to Kezu, Giganox is quite distinct from that fleshy freak. Being a quadruped similar to Tigrex, he's able to move with a surprising amount of agility, being able to climb on both walls and ceilings. One of the most interesting mechanics he has is very similar to Nursilla in Wilds, where Giganox will produce these cocoon structures that'll output their offspring known as Gigi. These little stubs will jump on you and suck your blood, and are an absolute freak of nature. As someone who's not a big Kezu fan, I really like Giganox in comparison. His design, ecology, and fight all look to be much more interesting, and he would be absolutely perfect for this locale. You could argue that Nursilla already fills this niche and some of the mechanics like poison and babies are already with her, but the lack of pseudo-wyverns and wilds would definitely let Giganox stand out in the crowd. Kezu is another option you could argue for, but he's already had his time in the spotlight with Rise, and I think Giganox's return is long overdue in comparison. The choice I have next is one that did appear in both World and Rise, but I think fits so perfectly in this kind of environment that I had to include him. Barioth. I know a lot of people would prefer to see Tigrex or Nargacuga back given their wild popularity, but that's kind of emblematic of why I'm choosing Barioth instead. This Sabertooth has always felt like the odd one out, not just because he's the only member of the trio to not be a flagship, but he doesn't nearly get enough love from people in comparison. In my opinion, he's not only the best pseudo-wyvern, but also makes the best use out of the concept of a big cat monster, utilizing his nimbleness in both attacks and how he uses the environment to his advantage. These aspects are absolutely perfect for someone in the Iceshard Cliffs, as the cramped hallways and caverns would allow Barioth to jump from wall to wall, pouncing on you and unleashing ice tornadoes in a much more dangerous scenario. He's also one of the few that could actually use the floating rocks and uneven terrain to his advantage, maybe even have him hop from rock to rock the same way your Sacred does to travel. You could also pull in Frostfang Barioth from Iceborne as well, a variant that could easily match the difficulty found in G rank. He unfortunately came out at the wrong time in Iceborne, being mixed in with cataclysmic black dragons that definitely outshined him. I think giving Frostfang even more of an upgrade and not having him be overshadowed would help give him the recognition he deserves. In fact, that's what I'd hope for in base Barioth as well, letting him stand tall alongside Nargacuga and Tigrex as a revered classic. Because I wanted to prioritize old gen monsters for this video, I sadly haven't gotten the chance to discuss many originals from World or Rise, and based on what I've seen, it seems that the team behind Wilds has very little interest in bringing back any Rise Break originals. However, with the Iceshard Cliffs cutting down as many old gen options as it has, I finally get to talk about a Sunbreak original I want, Lunagaron. As mentioned with Barioth, you sorta need monsters with either flight or nimble mobility to properly traverse this precarious locale, and Lunagaron has mobility in spades. Not only would this allow him to travel with ease, but his smaller stature would work well with the cramped caverns, making full use of his speed and aggression like Odogaron did in the Rotten Vale. In fact, you could even incorporate Odogaron's ability to cling onto walls with this guy, which would be a really solid way to distinguish him from his first appearance in Sunbreak. Despite the werewolf inspiration, he feels like one of the more grounded monsters in Sunbreak's roster, and would fit this game's grounded approach much more than say Malzeno or Magnamalo. You could have him hunt the Rafna packs for food, or even get into feuds with Hirabami and Nursilla, sometimes killing them or stealing their food. We don't have a lot of fanged wyverns aside from Guardian Ebony, so I think Lunagaron would be a wonderful wolf to have in Wilds. Next up is another Rise monster, one of my personal favorites in fact. I give you Gosharog. This is a fanged beast I absolutely adore, and one of the best options to bring back into the 6th generation. Because of the unique yokai art approach to most of the Rise originals, I think a good number of them would unfortunately stick out in a game like this. Gosharog is luckily one of the exceptions. I feel his aesthetic would fit great for the Iceshard Cliffs, and you could easily turn his difficulty to match the likes of other G-rank monsters. Compared to some previously mentioned like Beatotus or Jade Baroth, Gosharog doesn't rely on the environment to create his ice properties, instead producing it through his ice breath. He could easily fit the role of an apex predator in this region, since the Iceshard Cliffs really lacks one, with Jin basically having no ecology. As mentioned with Lunagaron, he could also be feeding on the Rothmas or even get into fights with Blangonga or Nursilla. His size hits a nice balance between being able to traverse this biome while still being a big, imposing predator that very few creatures can stand against. He'd be like a serial killer, stalking you across the dark and cramped hallways, and given Gore Magala's cutscene in Sunbreak, having these two get an official turf war would be awesome. I would take Gosharog in a heartbeat, being an incredible monster that could truly bring some well-needed limelight to the Iceshard Cliffs. Our last monster for the day is an Elder Dragon that uses the ice element. Most would guess Velkhana based on that info, because aside from her, Alatrion, and Kushala technically, we have no other elders that use the ice element. That is, if one subspecies didn't exist. An Elder Dragon that has long been forgotten by a lot of fans, Orochi Kirin. This is a black and blue unicorn that controls cold air through its horn, rather than the bright blue lightning that the original Kirin has, with the lore claiming it to have frozen entire kingdoms in a single night. With this horn, Orochi Kirin can lower the surrounding air temperature below zero, and create large pillars of ice out of the moisture in the air, as well as icy fog that can encase you in a mass of frost to hinder your movement. This is a super interesting subspecies to me. Kieran is a monster I always wanted more from, and making a variation with the ability to literally freeze its environment and create ice out of thin air is a super neat way to expand on this monster. He was also supposed to appear in the Iceborne expansion, but was scrapped in favor of Fatalis at the last minute, so his return is well overdue. Given what I've said about this map, you can see why an ice-based Kieran would work so well, both in his small size and frozen abilities in an equally frozen environment. You could take advantage of the weather system too. Kieran has the ability to cause thunderstorms whenever he's around, so having intense blizzards or snowstorms occur when Orochi appears would be awesome. It would also be super cool to see what they did with his ice effects. Considering how incredible the ice effects looked in Monster Hunter World Iceborne, they could really make Oroshi's ice AoEs a visual treat. I also would hope to see them expand on Oroshi's moveset, maybe implementing an ice armor gimmick or creating an ice horn that he can use for melee attacks. While the choices for this biome are pretty slim, I still think Orochi Kieran would be a brilliant Elder Dragon to incorporate into this game, and be a more than welcome addition to Monster Hunter Wilds. That'll be all from me today. I want to keep this outro short and sweet, so thank you all for watching this video. Do let me know if I made any mistakes when talking about these old monsters. I've only played the new games after all. Were there any monsters I missed? Any monsters you think were better options than the ones I mentioned? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear more from people who have a lot more history in this franchise. Feel free to like and subscribe to stay in touch with my upcoming videos, such as a ranking going over all the title update monsters, and of course, the inevitable Monster Hunter Rise ranking. This is Brightbashton Benedicts, and lead thy life as thou seest fit.